And the winner of the 1975 Mr. Universe competition is Kenny Waller. Kenny Waller, the guy that stole Mike Katz's t-shirt. If you guys watched Pumping Iron, which I can bet 80% of you guys did, and if you didn't, stop this video right now and go watch Pumping Iron. Kenny Waller, you'll know that he defeated the guy with the abs. I can't believe the guy with the abs placed third. I would have put the guy with the abs, who is Paul Grant, of course. I would have placed him first. Roger Walker in second. Now, maybe would have had him versus Kenny Waller battling it out for second. But either which way, Kenny Waller went on to win the finals, the overall title as well, defeating Robbie Robinson. Now, where am I going with this? In my opinion, Robbie Robinson, Paul Grant, guys like that were better than Ken Waller. Now, there's other things involved, back development, calves, things of that nature that we might not have considered. But either which way, this, in my opinion, makes Kenny Waller overrated for him to defeat all those guys. Now, if you follow his career, you will realize that, yes, Robbie Robinson did go on to prove his salt. He did defeat Kenny Waller on the Olympia stage. So, as a whole, no, I don't consider Kenny Waller overrated. But if you only watched Pumping Iron, I guess you could consider Ken Waller an overrated bodybuilder. And that's what we are going to take a look at today, ladies and gentlemen. So sit back, relax, pop your popcorn, sody pops, coffees, brewskis, whatever you like, and I will tell you a tale of bodybuilding. Bodybuilding's past, as you can see. It's a pretty old picture here, and this is just a fun way to begin this one. This is Charles Atlas, and he wasn't really what I consider a competitive bodybuilder. He did, however, win a competition, America's Most Perfectly Developed Man, 1922. So, considering he didn't really compete, why do I consider this legend overrated? Because there was other guys around at that time that, in my opinion, were far superior as a bodybuilder, like Sigmund Clean. And I apologize if I am mispronouncing that guy's last name, but he was incredible. And how many people know who Sigmund Clean is versus Charles Atlas? Are you kidding me? So why is Charles so famous? It was because of the Charles Atlas course. You guys remember this little skit back of comic books? Guy gets sand kicked in his face. He goes and works out and then boom, punches out the bully. Either way, Charles Atlas, he sold so many of those and made his fortune. So I guess in retrospect, he's not really an overrated bodybuilder. And food for thought, he didn't have a bad back double bicep back in his day. Now we kind of really begin this one with a true bodybuilding legend in John Grimek. Now, John, he was a great bodybuilder. He had big, thick quads, heavy set arms, big man's chest. For his time, he was great. So why do I consider him overrated? Because he was never defeated. He defeated the likes of Steve Reeves, George Eiferman, just to name a few. Another guy that never could get a victory over John Grimek, who I consider far superior also, would be Clarence Ross, a bodybuilder that many people, including myself, would consider underrated. So that's John Grimek. With credentials like that, you figure that he would have a better build. And one more coup for John Grimek. He's the NABA symbol, much like Joe Weider for the IFBB is for the background pictures. Yeah, that's John Grimek. Quite a thing to put on your resume. Now, one thing that does lend some credibility to John Grimek's success was that he was an Olympic-style weightlifter. Not only that, but he was very flexible, pulling off splits up on the stage, things of that nature. Now, that could be a reason that he was defeating all of those guys. I mean, at one time, they would lift weights up there on the stage. But that's John Grimek. Take it for what it is. I believe he is overrated. And the next bodybuilder on the chopping block, unfortunately, guys, and this does seem mean, to call a legend, Larry Scott, the legend himself, overrated. I mean, come on, Mark's Max Muscle. I have to have some explanation for this. Well, the IFBB Mr. Olympia title, it's the greatest title of all time. And Larry Scott is a 2-time Mr. Olympia. Not only that, but he's the very first ever 1-time, and then he was the first ever 2-time Mr. Olympia champion. So how could that be overrated? Well, the thing of it is, guys, there were bodybuilders around at that time competing for NABA that were far superior. So if you think Larry Scott was the greatest bodybuilder on earth, you'd have to look at Reg Park. I mean, that guy was probably one of the best. If not for Bill Pearl, who I consider probably the best bodybuilder of Larry Scott's time. And he was, he continued on after Larry Scott retired. Larry did make one little comeback, but other than that, I would consider Larry Scott overrated, as mean as that sounds. And I guess the hits are just gonna keep on coming. Frank Zane. I consider Frank Zane to be an overrated bodybuilder. Did they get any more legendary than Zane? Well, aesthetically speaking, he is incredibly underrated. But for this video, I consider him to be an overrated bodybuilder. Frank was competing back in the early to mid-70s, and he was losing to guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger, come on, get to the chopper, and Franco Columbu, a guy that many of you may consider overrated. I do not, and I'll explain that in a bit. But either way, in 75, Arnold retired, and after 76, Franco retired. And that left Frank Zane pretty much unopposed as far as stiff competition is concerned. So he racked up 3 Olympia titles. And another almost sure thing for being a multiple-time Mr. Olympia champion was the early retirement of Lou Ferrigno. I believe Lou Ferrigno would have dominated the bodybuilding world for many years. And Frank Zane, we would have been saying, who's Frank Zane? But either way, guys, does that really make Frank Zane overrated? These guys weren't even competing. But you know who was? The likes of Boyer Coe and Mike Menzer, who really, they probably should have been beating Zane at one time or another. If not Robbie Robinson. I mean, yes, pictures are very unclear, and you can't really judge those pictures, going off those pictures back then. But come on. A much more impressive physique than Frank Zane. But at the end of the day, Frank Zane will remain a 3-time Mr. Olympia champion and a guy that once defeated Arnold Schwarzenegger on the bodybuilding stage. Not too many can say that. And that leads us to this gentleman. I'm sure many of you guys expected to see Chris Dickerson on my list of overrated bodybuilders. He was average. He was okay. He had some good body parts, guys. He had some outstanding wheels for his time, calves included. But I still consider him overrated. 1983, he won the Mr. Olympia title. There was some great ones up there. You had Frank Zane, Samir Banu was there, Albert Beckles, another great choice, Tom Platz. I mean, come on. Even Casey Viator was outstanding. And of all those guys, Chris Dickerson, he reigned supreme. I guess that alone can make you an overrated bodybuilder, but winning the title, I mean, you can be overrated by placing second, and placing second he did in the very controversial 1980 Olympia when Arnold Schwarzenegger, come on, get to the chopper, made his return. Not a lot of people talk about how Chris Dickerson placed second when Boyer Coe was there, and he reportedly was in outstanding condition. Thin skin, things of that nature. Mike Menzer also. So yeah, even placing second above all these great bodybuilders can make you overrated. Same thing happened the very next year. 1981. Franco Columbu. And this may make you guys consider Franco Columbu an overrated bodybuilder. 1981, sure, but that was kind of a little bit of a debacle. You see, Franco Columbu, earlier on in his career, he was always playing second string to Arnold, and I think he was a great bodybuilder. I wouldn't consider him overrated at all. back in those days. So having said that, I kind of scratched Franco off my list. And Chris Dickerson, he remains there because he was defeating all those guys in 1980 and 81. He was defeating the likes of Danny Padilla, Tom Platz, a fresh, crisp Tom Platz. So at the end of the day, I would consider Chris Dickerson to be an overrated bodybuilder. And that leads us to this gentleman, Mohamed Makkawy. And unlike many of the guys you've seen, he was never a Mr. Olympia champion. He was overrated simply by placing second. He placed second in 1983 against Samir Banu, and quite a gap. Quite a gap, if I do say so myself, between these two dudes. That may be because there was a lot of other guys that probably should have placed ahead of Mohamed Makkawy, namely Bertil Fox there, and Lee Haney. Could that have been a better choice? Yeah, Mohamed Makkawy, one of the only bodybuilders to defeat Lee Haney on the Olympia stage. He actually defeated him at a Grand Prix prior to that as well, and you'll notice Bertil Fox actually defeated Lee Haney, so kudos to him. But either which way, guys, Mohamed Makkawy, as great as he was, he also placed second in 1984. And Lee Haney did, in fact, eat him up finally in 1984. But, I mean, their history shows that Mohamed Makkawy, he has defeated some great ones, even defeated Larry Scott. I mean, how many bodybuilders can say they defeated Lee Haney, Larry Scott, even Sergio Oliva? You can throw that on the list. Frank Zane, just to name a few. So yes, a definite legend with a huge resume, but physique-wise, I would consider him overrated. And I would say the same thing about this gentleman, Rich Gaspari. Him, much like Mohamed Makkawy, he placed second. More than once. He placed second 1986, 87, and in 88. 89 he got fourth. 85 he got third. Pretty good resume. And I gotta say, the physique just does not reflect that type of success on the bodybuilding stage. Sure, he was ripped. He had steroided glutes. Like Lee Priest says, steroided glutes. But to place second so many times at the Mr. Olympia event when there was a lot of other bodybuilders around, a lot of great ones. I mean, and also the cherry on this cake. Rich Gaspari is the very first ever Arnold Classics, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic. So he's an Arnold Classic champion, multiple time silver medalist, an outstanding resume, guys. And I don't mean any disrespect to Rich Gaspari. Like I said, condition-wise, maybe among the very, very best. But I do believe at that time there was other bodybuilders just as good or better than Rich Gaspari, making him, in my opinion, overrated. When you get into the 1990s, it gets a little more hazy. Do you consider, say, Dorian Yates, the 6-time Mr. Olympia champion? Do you consider him to be overrated? If you look at his 1997 version, yeah, of course he is. That was a terrible version. 1994 also, just terrible. But are you going to base an entire career on 2 different years? Other than those 2 years, he was pretty dominant against a lot of great bodybuilders. His conditioning was revolutionary in 1993, coupled with size that the bodybuilding world has never seen. So a lot of people might consider Dorian overrated due to his bad years. I do not. As a whole, I do not consider Dorian Yates overrated whatsoever. And then we get to Jay Cutler, perhaps the final overrated bodybuilder that we're going to look at. Jay Cutler, he's one of the great ones, guys. On his resume, nobody can touch this guy. Nobody can touch Jay Cutler's accomplishments. He placed second, 6 times at the Olympia? More than anybody else. He won the bloody show 4 times. He's a 4-time Mr. Olympia champion. Only guy ever to lose the title and regain it. I guess that's an accomplishment. I guess. And not only that, a 3-time Arnold Classics, come on, Arnold Classic champion. With a resume like that, and with the final cherry on the cake, he was the man to finally dethrone the king. Ronnie King Coleman, with a resume like that, Jay Cutler should, let's face it, he should look better. He looked good in 01. He looked great. But there was some shots where, he wasn't the best of all time. And he looked good in 09. He was fantastic in 09. But again, there was some shots that show that, no, he wasn't the greatest bodybuilder of all time. Other than those 2 years, he was pretty off a couple of those years as he was chasing Ronnie King Coleman. And he was very off in 2007. When he defeated a fresh, crisp Victor Martinez. So there was some controversy there. And then he went ahead and lost the title the following year. So, does that resemble greatness? I don't know. And he did come back the next year, 2009. Defeated Dexter Jackson and Branch Warren to regain his title. And then won it one more time, 2010. Maybe not his best look. But as a whole, guys, I would rate Jay Cutler to be overrated just simply because of the outstanding resume the guy has. Now, having said that, I respect Jay Cutler. There's not too many bodybuilders on the face of this earth that I respect more than Jay Cutler. He was a gracious winner, and he was an even more gracious loser. Like I said, he placed second to more bodybuilders, more times than any other bodybuilder on the face of the earth. So that will about do it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I really hope you enjoyed it. Hard to say that Hunter Labrada is overrated, but I'm sure most of you guys would say that he is, considering he defeated Andrew Jacked at the Olympia, and most people would say Andrew Jacked should have got the nod between the two. But they are competing, if I'm not mistaken, at the Texas Pro coming up. So if Andrew Jack defeats Hunter Labrada, pretty foolish for me to call him, Hunter Labrada, overrated when their careers are yet to be completed. So yeah, just my opinion, guys. Let me know in the comments section below. And hey, I'll hear your argument. Rich Gaspari, for instance, if you're looking at condition alone, hey, he might have been even underrated. And Frank Zane, ditto with his aesthetics. He's underrated. But as a whole, my opinion, guys, and that's what it is. And let me know your guys' in the comment section below. Have a great one.